What's up, Baylor family? Welcome into Inside Baylor Sports, the official daily podcast of Baylor Athletics. It's Thursday, August 22nd, and today we're going to take a look at something that caught us all a little bit by surprise, the release of single-digit jersey numbers by the Baylor football program earlier this week. Grayson, this was something that the team didn't do last year. Only 3 guys on the entire team had single digits, which is interesting considering the amount of players on the roster these days. Personally, I enjoy seeing these. I know there's kind of mixed reviews, but I enjoy seeing these from our perspective because it provides a little more insight to who these players are, you know, what they're about with their teammates. They can get these numbers for a variety of reasons, including leadership, importance to the team, work ethic. I mean, the list kind of goes on. It's not just pigeonholed to one specific reason. Why offensive linemen can't have them, obviously, so that, you know, changes a little bit the idea of what these are about. Not necessarily you couldn't have an offensive lineman have one. They just technically cannot have one. Players could vote on them, but they can't have them. So initial takeaways, I mean, there's 10 of these numbers now that players can wear. Number 0, they're not duplicated. So truly just 10 of these players have these 0 through 9. Off the top, any of these really stand out to you? But we'll make sure to hit on all of them. But I want to see if there's any that stick out to you off the top.
I think just really quick, just kind of setting the stage for this. I think a lot of people have been cautious about this because of, you know, it was a Matt Rule thing, right? Yeah. And so a lot of people are kind of equating this to being the same thing. It's not the same thing as what Rules was. I know that there's probably parts to it that are, but Rule was very much like, this was massive if you're able to get this. This was like such an honor. He talked about all the time. This is so different than that. So I think that's probably a reason for people maybe being a little bit unsure if they want this. But I think most people are like, where were these single digits last year? Why are there only 3 guys out there wearing these really cool numbers that everyone normally really likes? So I think that part of it is important. But as far as the ones that stand out, you know, I'm not so sure that any of these guys truly surprised me more than Michael Trigg getting the number 1 jersey number. I think that one is probably the one where I went through the list and I was like, okay, I can see it. Heard good things about him. Yeah, this makes sense. But with him, it was like, man, he was banged up a little bit during fall camp initially. He was running with the 3rd string at times, and it just seems like he really, over the last probably week and a half, 2 weeks, just really has picked it up to another level. And obviously, I think this definitely signifies that he's been totally bought into the program and been working extremely hard to get to the point where he has a very successful season, which is very encouraging because he could definitely unlock something really special in this offense.
Yeah, so Michael Trigg, tight end, redshirt junior, transferred in after spending time at USC and then Ole Miss. And, I mean, when you look at his background, I mean, potential game changer for wherever he was going. When he was at USC, everyone thought he was a game changer. When he went to Ole Miss, everyone was like, he's going to be a game changer. But it just never broke through. And a lot of that had to do maybe with some immaturity issues. But overall, I mean, the talent's there. And the fact that he's getting this number, which we don't know for sure if this was something that was voted on by the players or exactly what it entailed. I'm sure there's something to do with that. But the fact that he got one of these numbers that a lot of people probably wanted, a lot of the players wanted, obviously, is a great sign. And, you know, we've talked about him in our tight end position preview. I mean, he absolutely has the talent to be a difference maker. And so it's obviously a great sign. I'm excited to see him on the field. And as you mentioned, like, he was a guy that was kind of running 3rd string. But then after the last scrimmage, Dave Aranda said he just kind of started showing out. And he's been a difference maker over a week or so. And there's a few different players that he mentioned. Another one of the guys is on this list, and we'll talk about him in a minute, Ashton Hawkins. But I'm excited to see him. And I kind of thought that he was always an X factor for this offense. If he could stay on the field and the mismatch issues that he could create, along with, you know, when you're talking about other guys on the field with him as receivers, it's going to be tough to guard all of them. And if he can stay on the field and make an impact, just another kind of arrow for Jake Spavital to use for this offense.
Right, and he's wearing a really pretty special number. I mean, that number 1 number is I feel like a pretty big one for Baylor fans, especially if you look at kind of recent memory with Corey Coleman and then, of course, Taylor Young. Those are 2 guys that really come to mind with the number 1. I think Ebner wore one as well. And he was one of those guys that just stuck with the program and kept grinding and really felt like by the end of his career, he was definitely looked at as one heck of a team player for the Bears. And so this is an important number. I mean, again, this is a number, those three guys, I mean, there are expectations, I believe, to live up to. And I think Trigg definitely has the ceiling to get there. But like you said, it's all about consistency. It's all about maturity. And it's all about, even if things aren't going right, can you persevere? Can you continue to stay focused and stay locked in? But I think this is a great sign of that.
Yeah, and I might be mistaken on this, and I'm like trying to rattle my brain, but I think Graylin Arnold might have worn number 1 in the 2019 season as well. Had a huge season for that team that went to the Big 12 championship and the Sugar Bowl, and that was Matt Rule's last year. So, okay, Michael's out of the way. We won't have to come back to him. He's wearing number 1, but now let's start at the top of the list, essentially, which 0 is a new number for college football fans, and that's with Jackie Marshall. This is I would say, considering his size and position, a defensive lineman wearing number 0 and a guy that could have a big impact is pretty cool.
Right. I think this is a really cool number. And this is one of those where you just kind of look at, like, right when you saw it, you're kind of like, oh, that's going to look sweet. Like, that's going to look really cool for him. So that was definitely a number that stood out just based on number 0 is pretty cool. I know in the past, Baylor had RJ Sneed in 2021 and Squirrel Williams in 2022 wearing the number 0. So those are two guys that I guess recent memory wore that number. But I think it's a pretty great sign, though. Jackie's been talked about a lot. We've mentioned him a lot. We talked about him on in the position previews. I have very high expectations for him this season. And I think this is pretty telling about kind of where he's trending. And for him to battle back after what happened to him before last season, getting injured, missing the whole season, for him to come back and battle like he has and really take that step forward as a leader, I think is really, really important. And personally, I think he's going to be Baylor's best defensive lineman this season. I really believe that. And so this is great to see, and it's going to be a very cool number to see run up and down the field and getting after the quarterback.
Yeah, and so really cool backstory with him is he came in as an interior linebacker, and everybody knew he was athletic, right? Like his tape was good. He had a lot of offers, and then has essentially grown out of that position, moved to Jack back in 2022, played a minor role there as kind of an outside linebacker position in 2022 before getting injured. And now he's on the defensive line at almost 300 pounds. And so I think he's retained that athletic ability. And obviously you want a guy like this. He's listed as a redshirt junior, technically a sophomore once he gets his medical back, if he utilizes it. But he's been around the program from everything we've heard from day one, hard worker, probably maybe not a vocal leader. We don't know his personality too much because we haven't seen him. We haven't heard from him a lot, but obviously there's a reason he's on this list, just like all these guys. And so you want someone like that. Not only can he be a difference maker, but also a great leader. Jackie could be that. I'm excited to see a Louisiana kid, has been around the program, and you look back at his recruiting, and as you would know, had a lot of offers from just about everyone. And high three.
One thing I want to mention about him that was really special kind of about his recruiting profile was, he was still 240 pounds in high school. So he wasn't little. I mean, he was a big dude, and he was returning punts for touchdowns, punt returns for touchdowns. And you're just sitting there like, holy cow, this guy's an absolute freak. And if he puts it all together, it's going to be something special athletically. That was one thing during his recruitment that's so different than what you typically see. He was very, very different at that time. And I think that's going to continue and finally kind of show itself in more of a on the field consistency basis. Because we've seen it at times like the strip against Kansas where I think he stripped the running back and then jumped on the football. Like, that's special stuff. So if he can get back to that point and do it consistently, he's going to have a huge impact for this team.
Yeah, and that play was actually in the open field, which was even more cool to see for a guy that size. All right, so we're through number 0, which is Jackie Marshall. Number 1, which is Michael Trigg. We talked about him originally at the very opening of the show as kind of the one that really stood out. Follow Baylor Plus and Sikkim 365 today on X, Instagram, and Facebook, and sign up for the new premium content bundle. For the monthly price is $17.99, a $5 per month savings. Baylor fans can access the full offerings that both platforms offer: the long-form storytelling, video, and all access behind-the-scenes content of Baylor Plus, and the premium news, analysis, and forums of Sikkim 365. Sign up today on either platform.
Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast, leave a review, and tell your friends about us. Catch Colt and I on Inside Baylor Sports every weekday. You can also watch the video version free over at BaylorPlus.com or the official Baylor Athletics YouTube channel.
Number 2, this is a guy that's coming back. He wore this number last year. I don't think he wore it in 2022, but Matt Jones, he did wear it in 2022. So Matt Jones, a super senior, a 6-year senior playing linebacker, a guy that I was really kind of surprised that Dave Aranda mentioned this as being a player since he's been out with an injury, as the team has missed in terms of leadership. And not that I didn't think he was a leader, but you've wanted him to grow into that role throughout his career. And I think now that he's finally settled into a position, that he has become that. So it's cool for him to retain this number. I don't think they would have taken it away from him at this point, especially coming at, and as a super senior. But we've talked about him just recently in our linebackers podcast. 11 and a half tackles for loss last year, has an opportunity to have a bigger year, just has to continue to learn that position. But what are your thoughts on Matt wearing number 2 and what he means to the team?
Well, I think with the new use of technology, he's going to have to be much more vocal than he was in the past, on the field and off the field. Like, you're going to have really good relationships. I think Matt Jones has gotten to that point. And I think, Big 12 Media Days, he talked about it, I feel like, a little bit, and just how he was still growing in that area. So that's really nice to hear. He's worn this number since 2022, like you mentioned. He took the number from Terrell Bernard when he left in 2021. And so he's kind of retained this for a long time. It's not surprising that he has it, but it's also really cool to see Matt continuing to be kind of a fixture in Baylor's defense. Yeah,
and this is also pretty interesting with Matt. He was on the 2019 team that played in the Big 12 Championship and Sugar Bowl. He was part of the 2021 team that played in the Big 12 Championship, won the Sugar Bowl, and now he's back for his last year. So he's been around the program through a lot, and I think that can't be overstated in his experience. Obviously, he has to produce and he has to have a great season for his legacy to be fulfilled ultimately as his own, because in 2019, 20, and 21, he was just a reserve player on those teams. But pretty cool that he has this opportunity now, wearing a single digit, to help this team get there. All right, we're gonna move along now to number 3, a junior in the secondary, Devin Bobby, plays safety out of DeSoto. And I mean, I think of all the group, this is kind of the one that's just, what do you really say about him? Because he hasn't had a breakout year by any means. He hasn't been the guy that just flashed, but I think he's going to be the one, to me, that stands out as kind of that silent leader in a lot of ways. We don't hear a lot from him, but he's respected by his teammates.
Right. And I think the fact that he's been around the program for a little bit longer than maybe some other guys like a Carl Williams, for instance, I think is a big deal. I think he's built more relationships and right. Dove deeper into that leadership role just because he's been there a little bit longer. Right. I mean, he's a good player, and he's shown moments at times and shown flashes. We saw it some last year, saw it some in 2022 as well. Him and Devin Lemire have kind of been the starters for the last 2 years, and now coming into this year, both are going to play a huge role. And I'm excited for Devin Bobby. I mean, he was a really good prospect out of DeSoto, and is a guy that I feel like there's something still to come for him. I think there's a little bit more there, a little more untapped potential that he could reach this season. And I think they need him to. They need guys at that safety position to really take a big step forward after what was a pretty tough season, I feel like, for the secondary and for everyone last year, to be honest.
Yeah, and he's a guy that did not redshirt back at his freshman year, which that would have been the 22 season. He was asked to play in the secondary. Then he plays last year as a sophomore, essentially as a starter. And now I would say that if there's going to be a time or moment that he becomes most comfortable, you keep in mind that they switched kind of what they were doing in the secondary from 22 to 23 and their emphasis on playing different coverages back there in the safety positions. Now he's kind of been in this role for 2 years. I think when you talk about there's more to come, I think that's a reason why. Not only is he older, but he also has been in the same kind of scheme, the same kind of idea in what he is going to be expected of him under Coach Aranda this year as a defensive coordinator. And he could, I think even in high school, he was recruited as a corner. So to a certain degree as a corner, I think he played it some in high school. And you want his coverage ability to pop. But I think he's also physical. Even though he has a smaller size, he's very physical against the run and can be that. And talk about guys that just need to stop thinking and just play the entire defense, but these safeties have to do that. They were young, generally inexperienced, and Devins can lead the way there. I'm excited to see him, especially when you talk about the guys in front of him playing better. If they can play better, those safeties' lives get a lot more easy. So any final thoughts on Devin before we move on to number 4?
No, I agree with you. I think if the front can be a little bit better, there'll be more opportunities for turnovers and for him to really flash his athleticism a little bit more than he's been able to.
Yeah, he actually mentioned about being in post practice against the Jugs machines because he dropped a couple of interceptions last year. So I think that I don't think he has one in his career yet. I'm sure one's coming at some point. These guys get more and more reps to get used to what's coming at them. So all right, so that was number 3, Devin Bobby. Now we're moving on to number 4, which I think this is another guy who's been around the program for so long and earned it in a lot of ways. You hear about Monaray Baldwin and his explosive ability. I feel like he's another guy that didn't redshirt early in his career because they needed him on the field. And now he's going into his 4th and his senior season. And he has a lot of potential to unleash. But I think it's great to hear because last year during the season, there was some talk about him not playing because of reasons that were not on the field related. And now he has the number 4. He's a single digit voted on by his teammates. And, is this the season he's kind of unleashed as a senior?
Right at the beginning of last year, it felt like he was kind of in the doghouse. I mean, Jonah Burton, a walk-on, was starting over him, and then he comes in that Texas State game and immediately makes an impact. But it's interesting because I think with Monaray, this is a great sign. And I think in this offense, he's going to have a lot of opportunities to make a lot of plays. And we mentioned him a little bit on the wide receiver preview, just about the simple fact that you basically know what you're getting from Monaray statistically, like that's who he is, but there's upside there with a better offense and better quarterback play. And so I'm really intrigued by that. I think his speed is very evident, and his leadership clearly has continued to grow throughout his time at Baylor.
Yeah, and I think, too, you have a guy, when you don't get that redshirt freshman year, and we could talk about that with a lot of these guys, but when they don't get that redshirt year, and they're kind of thrown into the fire, they don't have the opportunity to really develop or see those traits from other people. They're just trying to find their way, figure out where they're going. He was a guy that played minimal snaps. I mean, when I talk minimum, he might have played less than 25 snaps in his true freshman season, despite burning his red shirt. He had a big game or a big run in the Sugar Bowl against Ole Miss where he broke for, I don't know, it was 40, 50 yards and scored. And you saw that explosiveness. And then the expectation from that point on is this is going to be an explosive player, but you miss the opportunity to develop sometimes in these leadership roles for your teammates, et cetera. And I think by the time you catch up is when you're later in your career. So I'm excited what Monaray is going to bring. You want a guy that can light the fire, and he can make those big plays that can kind of get everybody going, not only just vocally, but you think about the UCF game last year where he had a couple of plays where he just took a short pass, broke it, and he was physical. For a guy that's smaller, he was physical and run with the ball and gets his teammates fired up. So I'm excited to see. I think he's one of 2 receivers on this list, which Baylor probably could have multiple guys on there. But right. I think in the offense is going to need receivers to make plays. Obviously, it's a good sign for him to be on there. All right, moving on. That was number 4, Monaray Baldwin. Looking at number 5, someone that we've talked a lot about, another super senior, Garmon Randolph at outside linebacker, playing that edge position. Another guy with the make or break year. It's kind of time to do it. And you have a world of potential, 6'8", 260 pounds, and is going to be put in positions to make a lot of plays this year.
This is another guy that we've heard a lot about. And as far as his growth, you know what I mean? Like just really, it feels like he's grown a ton over the last year and maybe put together his best offseason. I know Aranda said that I feel like it's easy to say when it's someone's last year, but I also feel like there's something to it. It feels like things are kind of trending in that direction for him to really have a lot of success this season. So we'll see how things pan out for him. But I think this is another one of those great signs when you're seeing a guy with this kind of potential, get a single digit number, get an opportunity to really establish himself as a leader, and a guy that I feel like has grown up a lot during his time at Baylor. So really excited for that for Garmon. The last guy to wear this number was Dylan Doyle back in 2021 and 2022.
Yeah, good note there. Garmon actually moved from number 55 to number 5 as well. So cool little note there. Number 6 on the list, another receiver. We just talked about Monaray Baldwin. Ashton Hawkins, a transfer receiver. Actually, he is the second transfer that we've discussed along with Michael Trigg. But I mean, I feel like maybe David Randall was telling us something whenever he talked about all those players in the scrimmage, because every one of them have been on this list. But Ashton was a guy that said, Coach Randall said, is basically at times unguardable in practice, which it could be a good or bad thing when you talk about scrimmages and you're going up against your own defense. But from what we know about Ashton, he brings swagger, but he brings production from Texas State. He did it against Baylor back in 2022. I can't remember what his numbers were last year against Baylor. But he's now a Bear and obviously has earned some respect. You know, I don't know if these guys are lobbying for numbers or what, but he's on there, and another senior. And I think that's a great sign to have another senior. There's not a lot of underclassmen on this list, but initial takes on Ashton making this list as a newcomer.
He torched Baylor last year and the year before. He has really kind of given it to Baylor a little bit during his time. So it doesn't really surprise me that he comes to Baylor and is continuing to thrive. I mean, he really is a difference maker. And he's the kind of transfer that they got that I think it's one of those massive ones because he knows the offense so well. He knows exactly where he needs to be. He's, learned from Jake Spavital in the past. He's a guy that was recruited by Jake Spavital. I just think everything lines up really well for him to have a very, very good season. I think he's going to be extremely productive. We kind of previewed that on the wide receiver previews, but this is a good sign. But again, this one doesn't surprise me. This is one where it's like, since the moment he got to Baylor, got on campus, he has been an alpha, an unquestioned alpha on this team and for this receiver group. So it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I'm excited to see his playmaking ability. We hear it all, but we haven't seen it. We didn't see a spring game. We haven't seen any open field practices this fall. So like the opportunity to see him go up in one-on-one situations with defensive backs, playing in space, playing fast all the time from a down-to-down basis is going to be fun to watch. So that was Ashton Hawkins, number 6, a senior wide receiver. Now we're moving on to number 7, and I'll let you decide what number 7 actually means. But with Dequan Finn at quarterback, now the starting quarterback, obviously, you would want your quarterback to be here as number 7. Gary Bohannon didn't wear it in 21. He wore number 11. I think Charlie Brewer might have had it in 2020.
He wore number 5 in 2020, and it was his worst year. So
yeah. So now you have number 7 with DQ. I mean, you want this. You have to have this. You have to have. We've talked about his ability on the field, but also being a winner. He's won everywhere from the high school level to Toledo. He played in 2 championships there. He won a state championship in high school. Now it's at Baylor. He's actually never missed a bowl game as a starter at Toledo, which is a pretty cool stat, going back to his high school career, having major success. So he wants to win. He didn't come here to not win. I think it's kind of an under-discussed point. But he's the quarterback. He's a leader of the offense. He's going to get guys going. And fortunately, he can do it with his feet and arm because he might need it this year.
Yeah, he was just named quarterback 1. So we obviously talked about that on the podcast. And I mean, this is great because Dequan Finn is a guy who, again, like you said, winner, a guy that's a proven producer, has played against a lot of Power 4 opponents and showed out really well. I just think he fits everything that they were looking for at the quarterback position. And then he comes in and establishes himself as a leader as well, which has been mentioned quite a bit, especially recently. And so I think this is just another step in a very positive direction. I love the number 7. That just kind of gives me flashbacks to Michael Vick in a big way, which is pretty cool. And with his athleticism, you might see some of that. He doesn't quite have the shake and bake that Michael Vick had, but the speed, He definitely is up there with that. The number 7 position is interesting. Bryson Jackson in 2022 and last year, and then 2021 was Abram Smith. I did want to mention, you're right on Gary Bohannon. He did not have a single digit in 2021, but the number 4 was vacated. So I don't know if we remember this, but was that essentially Gary's number if he wanted it? Do you remember?
Possibly. I don't really remember that. I think based on the players voting at that time, I believe it was still, I don't know exactly what that is now. I think Gary absolutely was number 4 or single digit if he wanted it. He just didn't wear one. I couldn't imagine a situation where he wasn't given the opportunity to wear it. So whatever reason,
just a weird nugget.
Yeah. No, it is very interesting. And, we can talk about, the offense, but with this quarterback position in this offense, it's going to turn the butter, right? It's going to make it go. And so he's going to have to be a difference maker for this team to reach its potential. We talked a lot about him a lot on the podcast where he was named the starting quarterback. Make sure you go back and listen to that one. Now moving on to number 8, the only underclassman on this list. And I think, Devin Bobby is a 3rd-year player, but the rest of them are at least 4th-year players in their college career. But Kaden Jenkins is a sophomore wearing number 8. Kind of a telling thing. I think, you have a guy that was a freshman All-American, was a priority to retain in the offseason with NIL and everything going on. And now he's wearing number 8. 3 interceptions last year, playmaker. I think in a lot of ways, the most talked about Baylor player in the offseason. From a national perspective, if you listen to previews from people on YouTube, podcasts, whatever, they talk about Kaden Jenkins because it's easy to talk about. And it was a big playmaker as a freshman last year.
I mean, he's Baylor's best chance to be a All-American. I mean, he was a freshman All-American last year and was very productive, very good, very I think he just showed so many flashes. I know the consistency was not always there, but he was a true freshman and having to play a role that I'm not even sure the staff was expecting him to play. And he went out there and gave it all he had and really just made quite a few impactful plays for this team. And I think going into Big 12 Media Days, it was a little bit of a surprise to see Carl Williams there instead of Kaden Jenkins initially. So I think this is nice to see that Kaden is that it wasn't really about Kaden not stepping up. It was more about Carl just really stepping up and getting that Big 12 Media Day invite, because this clearly tells you something about kind of his growth, his kind of leadership maturity going from a true freshman to a true sophomore and really trying to establish himself as a leader on this team, which is very important, I think, for a guy, as young as him, but with as much upside as him. To have one of your best players really turning into a leader so young is very key for the health of the program. Yeah.
And, I don't know the history of this dating back to Matt Rule's time, but I don't know how many underclassmen actually ever had that number or a single digit number. So I would have to do some research to actually look, but there's not many of them. I mean, Devin Bobby might be the closest one, and he's just a 3rd-year player as a junior. So very, very cool to see Kaden to be on this list. So last one on the single digits is number 9, a defensive lineman, Trevin Maye. And man, that former Oregon player, transferred in last year. I think outside of Trigg, this one might have caught my attention the most. And not because he didn't have the opportunity to, or any of these guys didn't have the opportunity to, but I think his offseason was so strong and it just continued to get better throughout fall camp. And for him to get this, I think probably is a testament to his work ethic and his ability to improve all offseason. He's up, roughly 300 pounds now, is viewed as a guy that's going to help stop the run where they struggled last year, and just continues to work. You watch his, his game tape, he's always playing hard. And I think that's probably caught the attentions of his teammates to get this and the coaching staff to get this single digit number 9.
I kind of feel like he's one of the most not talked about guys who's actually been really good this offseason. So we've talked about him and we've mentioned him. I don't know that we've been, screaming from the mountains about him like we have with Michael Trigg or Ashton Hawkins. And that's probably a reason why I guess maybe expectations or idea of him getting a single digit probably caught people by surprise. And so I guess now is a really good time to just reiterate, he had a great offseason. and he continued to really excel on and off the field as a leader and a guy that they could really count on. And he had a really disappointing, I feel like, first year at Baylor. A lot of people forget he was a true defensive end coming out of high school. So there was still a lot of growing for him to do to really excel especially as a defensive tackle more so than a true end. And so I think this offseason was really important for him to be able to continue to be flexible, play the end, play inside, really just have that versatility that I think Baylor needs. I think Trevin is going to kind of set himself up to have a very solid season, and probably a season that people look back on and go, wow, why didn't I think he was going to have such a great season at the beginning of the year? But I do think he's an important one to mention, and a guy who I think truly could help this team during this season and maybe be a bigger factor than I think people realize at the moment.
Yeah, you mentioned on our defensive line podcast about this group not being too flashy. Dave Aranda's history with defensive lines is not too flashy, but you look at the whole, look back to the 2021 season, it was Cole Maxwell playing a defensive tackle, defensive end position, and unheralded, but man, just got the job done. You couldn't run to his side of the ball without having issues a lot of times. There were times, obviously, but you think that Trevin, you would hope that Trevin trends that way of you might not just flash, but if you go and watch the tape, you're like, nobody's running to his side of the field effectively. And that's what you hope with a defensive lineman like that, with his background, with the way that he works. So I'm excited for the defensive line if these pieces all come together. I think we could say that about the majority of the team, but these guys, new transfer, new faces, guys improving throughout their careers, it's all going to mesh. But overall, this group, 0 through 9, I think there's other guys that we could talk about being disappointed that aren't on the list for different reasons. But I think this is a very good sign of where this particular team is based on their names, based on their positions in classifications.
It definitely does. I got to mention one more nugget because I do think it's actually really fascinating. Steve Lenton is going to wear number 10, and that number has not been used since 2012 when Gary Mason wore that number.
Interesting.
No one has worn number 10 since then, except for Steve Lenton. That's it. I feel like there's something to that. I know he's not a single digit, but I do think that nugget does matter. And as most people would probably say, it's not necessarily a given that someone needs to wear the number 10 because there was a number 10 in Baylor's history that is going to live, in infamy forever. So I feel like Steve Lenton getting that number is definitely kind of a sneaky under the radar thing that might actually matter and be something people should pay attention to.
True. And number 10, Keaton Thomas, or number 11, Keaton Thomas changed from number 40 to wear number 11. Not that it means anything, but he did change his numbers. So, all right, Baylor family, that's going to do it for today's episode of Inside Baylor Sports. It's kind of a special edition to break down the single-digit jersey release. This is the official daily podcast of Baylor Athletics. Thank you so much for listening. For Grayson Gruenhafer, I'm Colt Barber. Have a great Thursday and Sick 'em Bears.